She walked into that courtroom with nothing but faith. Her billionaire husband thought he'd won, but when her mother stood up with a folder in her hands, the entire room gasped. What he'd hidden for 15 years was about to destroy everything. This is the story nobody expected. My name is Diane, and for 13 years I was invisible in plain sight. I remember the day I met Robert like it was yesterday. I was working as an event coordinator at one of his luxury hotels downtown. He walked into the ballroom during a corporate function, and something about the way he moved through the room made everyone else fade away. Not because he was the most handsome man there, though he wasn't bad looking. It was the confidence. The way money had given him permission to take up space in this world without apology. He noticed me straightening a floral arrangement. He asked me my name. By the end of that night, he'd asked me to dinner. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. He didn't fall in love with me. He collected me. Like everything else in his life, I was an acquisition. A beautiful black woman on his arm checked a box, made him look cultured, progressive, interesting. But I was 25 and naive. I thought love looked like penthouses and private jets. I thought adoration looked like credit cards with no limit and a ring with a diamond the size of a marble. We got married at a vineyard in Napa. His friends came. My mother came, and I remember her squeezing my hand during the vows, whispering, "Look at his eyes, baby. Really look." I didn't understand what she meant then. I was too busy feeling like I'd won the lottery. The first 5 years were intoxicating. We traveled constantly. Paris, Tokyo, Dubai. I wore clothes that cost more than my old apartment's rent. We hosted parties that made the society pages. I had everything a woman was supposed to want, everything except honesty. The cracks started small. A text message I wasn't supposed to see. A late night he claimed was a business call but came through as a location tag on his phone at an address I didn't recognize. A woman's perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine, something expensive and unfamiliar. I asked him about it, and he laughed. He actually laughed at me. "You're being paranoid," he said. "This is what happens when women have too much time on their hands." So I stopped asking questions. I told myself I was being crazy. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe this was normal for men like him, men with power and wealth. Maybe this was just the price of the life I'd chosen. But then I found the accounts. I wasn't snooping. I was updating our shared calendar when I noticed a separate banking app on his iPad, the one he always kept locked. He'd left it open while he was in the shower, and curiosity, that terrible, wonderful thing, made me look. What I found stopped my heart cold. There were 3 accounts I'd never heard of, millions of dollars flowing in and out to shell companies and offshore accounts. One of them had a woman's name on it, not his business associate, a woman. And there were transfers to a luxury apartment in the city that I realized, with horror, he'd been paying for. I screenshot everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. I thought about all the times he'd said our prenup was airtight, all the times he'd reminded me that I had no claim on his wealth. I thought about how he'd made me sign it before we even got engaged, how romantic, he'd said, knowing exactly who he was marrying and what he was protecting himself from. That night, I confronted him. I showed him the screenshots. I asked him to explain the woman, the apartment, the secret accounts. And instead of apologizing, instead of begging for forgiveness, he smiled. That same confident smile he'd given me in that ballroom years ago, except now it looked cruel. "Diane," he said slowly, like I was a child who needed things explained carefully. "You signed a prenup. Do you even understand what that means? It means you get nothing. Not the houses, not the cars, not a dime. When I'm done with this marriage, you'll walk out of here with the clothes on your back, and there's nothing you can do about it." He said it so calmly, like it was inevitable, like I was just another problem he'd already solved before I even knew there was a problem. I moved into the guest room that night. For the first time in 13 years, I slept alone in a bed that felt too big and too cold. I cried silently, my hand over my mouth so he wouldn't hear me. And in that darkness, something inside me shifted. The shock faded, and what replaced it was something harder, something that felt like survival. The next morning, I started making calls. I needed a lawyer, the best lawyer I could find who would believe me and fight for me. But the reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. The best lawyers, the ones who could take on someone like Robert, wanted retainers I didn't have access to. My credit cards were in his name. The money in our joint accounts was about to be frozen. I was becoming invisible all over again. That's when I found Sarah. She was a legal aid attorney, barely 30 years old, working out of a modest office in a building that smelled like old coffee and determination. She listened to my story without taking notes, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something I'll never forget. "He thinks he's already won." That's his first mistake. Men like that always underestimate women who have nothing left to lose. Sarah took my case pro bono. She knew it would be David and Goliath. She knew his legal team would circle like sharks. She knew the prenup was probably ironclad, but she also knew something else. She knew I was telling the truth, and sometimes that's all a person needs. For the next 3 months, we prepared. Sarah was relentless. She dug through financial records, interviewed people Robert had worked with, traced the flow of money through company after company. But the prenup was a fortress. No matter what we found, no matter what infidelity we proved, that document stood between me and any significant portion of his wealth. My mother came to stay with me during that time. She'd taken leave from her job to be there. She didn't say much, that wasn't her way, but her presence was everything. She'd cook my favorite meals. She'd sit with me when I couldn't sleep, and sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, like she was remembering something, like she was waiting for something. "Mom, what is it?" I asked her one night. She just shook her head and smiled sadly. "Nothing, baby. I'm just here." The day the trial started, I was terrified. I wore a navy dress that hung loose on me. I'd lost 10 pounds I didn't have to lose. Robert came into the courtroom in a 3-piece suit, surrounded by lawyers in expensive shoes. He looked at me and smirked, that same smirk, like he'd already written the ending, and I was just an extra in his story. The first day was devastating. His legal team dismantled everything we'd prepared. Yes, he cheated. Yes, there were secret accounts and a hidden woman, but none of it mattered. The prenup was legally binding. I'd signed it of my own free will. The infidelity didn't negate the agreement. The judge looked almost sympathetic, but sympathy isn't justice. Sympathy doesn't pay bills or give you back your life. Sarah's face got tighter as the day went on. By the time we broke for lunch, I could see the doubt creeping in. We sat in a small consultation room while our sandwiches went cold, and she said quietly, "We need something else, something we don't have yet." That afternoon, things got worse. His lawyers produced testimony from people who claimed to know me personally, people who said I'd married him for money, that I'd always been a gold digger, that I'd even bragged about it to friends. Some of it was true. I had married him for money, but it was also more complicated than that. It was love and ambition and naivety all twisted together. It was me being young and believing that financial security meant emotional security. By 5 o'clock, when the judge called for recess, I felt the ground collapsing beneath me. I'd come into this courtroom hoping for justice. I was leaving with the very real possibility that I'd be homeless within weeks. I sat in the courthouse hallway, staring at the marble floor, trying not to cry. The hallway was busy with lawyers and clerks and other people with their own legal battles. Nobody paid attention to the black woman sitting alone on a bench, her whole life unraveling in real time. I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. "How is it going, baby?" she asked quietly. I couldn't speak without my voice breaking, so I didn't try. I just breathed into the phone and she listened. After a long moment, she said, "I'm coming inside now. I've been in the gallery. I'm coming inside." I didn't understand what she meant. She was already there? She'd been watching? But I didn't have time to ask questions because the bailiff was already calling us back into the courtroom. We were almost at the end. The judge was about to dismiss the case and rule in Robert's favor. Sarah stood up and said quietly, "Your Honor, I have one more witness to call." Robert's lawyers exchanged confused glances. They thought they'd presented everyone. The judge frowned, but he nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom doors opened, and my mother walked in. She was wearing a navy dress, the same as mine. I found out later she'd done it deliberately. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She moved through that courtroom with a grace and purpose that made the air seem to shift. And she was carrying a folder, a thick, worn leather folder that looked like it had been kept carefully for a very long time. Robert's smirk vanished. His jaw clenched. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. My mother took the oath and sat in the witness stand. Sarah approached her carefully, almost reverently. "Can you please state your name for the record?" "Patricia Williams. And I have something to tell you all." The courtroom was silent. Completely silent, like everyone could sense that something seismic was about to happen. 28 years ago, my mother began, her voice steady and clear, I worked as a housekeeper in this man's family home. I worked there for 4 years, and during that time, I knew his father very well. Robert Sr. trusted me, maybe because I was invisible to him, maybe because I was quiet and kept to myself, but he talked to me. He told me things. Robert stood up. "Your Honor, this is—" "Sit down," the judge said sharply. My mother continued. "Robert Sr. made his fortune from fraud, not from the legitimate business dealings the family claims. He created shell companies. He laundered money through real estate development. He bribed officials. He stole from investors. And he kept meticulous records because he was proud of what he'd done. He felt like he'd beaten the system." She opened the folder. "When Robert Sr. died, I took these documents. I know it was wrong. I was young and I was scared, but I took them because I knew someday they might matter. And then I met my daughter. I saw her marry his son, and I watched that boy become his father. So I kept these papers, and I waited." Sarah took the documents from her. They were letters, journals, bank statements, receipts, everything. Every single piece of evidence that Robert's entire empire was built on illegal foundations. The prosecution would call it money laundering. The IRS would call it tax evasion. But what it really was the unraveling of a lie so big that an entire family had been living inside it for 3 generations. Robert's lawyers were on their feet, shouting objections. The judge was banging his gavel. But none of it mattered. The truth was out. And the truth, as it turns out, is very hard to put back in a folder. What happened next happened fast. The judge ordered the documents to be authenticated. The FBI got involved within hours. Federal agents came to our apartment with a warrant. They seized everything: the computers, the records, the offshore accounts. Within a week, Robert's assets were frozen pending criminal investigation. His lawyers dropped him. Suddenly, the man with unlimited resources had nobody. His business partners distanced themselves. The woman he'd been cheating with? She'd already disappeared, and it came out later that she'd been helping him move illegal money. She was cooperating with investigators to reduce her own sentence. I watched it all unfold from a distance, almost in a daze. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life get destroyed. But then I'd remember those 13 years, all those moments of doubt and shame and invisibility, all those times he'd made me feel less than, and I'd feel something shift inside me. Not revenge, I'm not sure I'm capable of that, but justice. Yes, justice felt right. The trial lasted another month. Sarah was brilliant. She connected every piece. She showed how Robert hadn't just inherited tainted wealth, he was actively moving illegal money through his hotel chains. He'd expanded the empire, but he'd also expanded the crimes. Wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. The list went on. In the end, it didn't matter what the prenup said. The assets themselves were illegal. You can't have a legally binding contract based on illegally obtained money. The whole thing crumbled like a house of cards. Robert was convicted on 8 counts, 12 years in federal prison. He cried when they read the sentence, not because he was sorry, but because he finally understood that his money couldn't protect him, that his power had an end. The court awarded me 60% of the assets that remained after the government seized what they could. The house, the investments, substantial alimony, more importantly, my freedom. My mother and I sat in the house a week after the verdict. The same house where I'd spent 13 years trying to be enough for a man who was never going to let me be enough. We sat in the kitchen, and I made her tea the way she'd taught me when I was a little girl. "Why did you wait so long?" I asked her. "Why didn't you come forward years ago when you first knew something was wrong?" She wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at me for a long moment. "Because you needed to do this yourself, baby. I couldn't save you from him. He was your husband, your choice, your life. If I'd come in with that folder in year 1, you would have always wondered if you could have made it on your own. You would have always owed the victory to me instead of owning it yourself." I started to cry then, not the desperate tears of before, but something cleaner, something that felt like healing. "I was scared," she continued. "I was scared for so long. Scared that his family would come after me, that they'd find out I had those documents and ruin my life. But I was more scared of what would happen to you if you lost yourself completely. Sometimes, baby, the strongest thing a mother can do is let her child struggle and then stand with her when she's ready to fight." She reached across the table and held my hand. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. I understood that my mother had been carrying this weight for years, that she'd watched me make a choice she couldn't undo, that she'd waited patiently, watching my face, waiting for the moment when I'd finally be ready to see the truth myself. I didn't spend the settlement money on anything frivolous. I could have bought another penthouse or collected cars or designer bags. Instead, I did something that surprised everyone. I started a foundation, the Patricia Williams Foundation for Legal Advocacy. It provides free legal representation to women in abusive or exploitative marriages who can't afford it. We've helped 42 women in the last 2 years. 42 women who might have otherwise disappeared inside someone else's lie, the way I almost did. I went back to school. I wanted to understand the law better, to be part of the solution in a deeper way. My mother comes to my classes sometimes and sits in the back, and I catch her smiling at me like she's seeing something I can't quite see myself yet. Robert is in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. From what I understand, he doesn't do well there. A billionaire in general population, a man who was used to controlling everything suddenly has no control. His cellmate is a guy named Marcus who apparently doesn't care about Robert's money or his family name. I've heard through the grapevine that Robert's learned more humility in 2 years than he learned in 50 years of freedom. The woman, the one he was cheating with, got 3 years. His business partners got various sentences. The entire house of cards came down, and somehow, in the middle of all that destruction, I found myself again. Karma isn't always fast. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes a mother's quiet courage and a daughter's willingness to finally see the truth. But it's always honest. That's what I've learned. I'm not the same woman I was 13 years ago. That woman was looking for someone else to complete her, to validate her, to give her permission to take up space in this world. This woman, the one I am now, knows that the only permission I need is my own. My mother and I take a trip every year now, usually somewhere quiet, somewhere we can just be together without the noise of everything else. Last month we were in the mountains, and she said something that I've been thinking about ever since. "You know what was hardest?" she asked. "Not coming forward sooner. It wasn't the fear or the waiting. It was watching you learn that some people will take and take and take and they'll call it love." "Did you know?" I asked her. "That day I met him? Did you know what he would do?" She smiled sadly. "No, baby, but I knew he was the type of man who'd never let you be yourself. And I knew that one day you'd have to choose between him and you. I just didn't know it would take 13 years. The truth is, I don't know if I'd change anything if I could go back. It sounds crazy, but those 13 years taught me something that no amount of free advice could have. They taught me that sometimes you have to walk through the dark to understand the value of light. Sometimes you have to be invisible to know what you're capable of when you finally decide to be seen. Did you see that coming? Did you feel the moment everything changed? Hit like if Patricia's courage gave you chills. Comment below and tell me, who's the strongest woman you know? And please, subscribe to this channel for more stories of justice, redemption, and the kind of karma that reminds us that truth always finds a way out. Because here's what I know. If you're watching this, and you're in a situation where someone's making you feel small, making you feel like you don't deserve justice, making you feel invisible, hear me. That's not love. That's not marriage. That's not your fault. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to fight for yourself. Diane did. And look at her now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.